Tonight, we're heading far north, to places where the cold isn't the only thing that chills your bones. They say in some Canadian small towns, the silence itself can listen. The snow hides more than footprints, and sometimes the lights you see in the woods aren't from cabins at all. Tonight, we dive into 10 of the most disturbing true horror stories from small towns across Canada. Places so isolated that when something sinister happens, there's no one left to hear you scream. One family vanished during a winter storm. Their footprints stopped in the middle of a frozen lake. Another man claimed a woman kept knocking on his door every night at 3 a.m., whispering his name, even after he moved miles away. But here's the strangest part. Each town shares one terrifying connection, something that refuses to stay buried. What's haunting these quiet corners of Canada? And why does it always return when the snow begins to fall? My name is Evan, and I grew up in a forgotten little town called Coldwater, buried deep in Ontario's endless forest. It wasn't on most maps, just a handful of houses, a gas station, a diner, and a lake so still it looked like polished glass. The lake was everything to us. We fished from it, skated on it, and told stories about it. But one thing everyone agreed on: never go near it after sunset. The elders said, "The lake takes what it wants." I thought it was just another spooky tale meant to scare kids. Until one night, I couldn't sleep. I looked out my frosty bedroom window and saw a lone man walking across the frozen lake. His steps echoed in the stillness, crunching against the ice. Halfway across, he stopped and turned directly toward my house. I couldn't see his face, just a pale blur, but I swear his eyes locked onto mine. Then, the ice beneath him split open. No scream, no struggle, just silence and ripples and frozen water. The next morning, I told my father what I saw. His face went pale. He didn't ask for details, didn't question me. He just said, "You didn't see anything, Evan. Forget it." Then he locked the door and told me to stay away from the lake. That night, the entire town gathered at the diner. Someone said a stranger had gone missing. He was a traveler whose car broke down on Highway 11, last seen walking toward the lake. The sheriff said they'd search when the ice was safer, but everyone knew what that meant. They'd never look. Over the next few nights, I started hearing strange noises, soft thuds beneath the floorboards, like something tapping from below. My window would frost over from the inside, forming patterns that looked like handprints pressed against the glass. One morning, I woke to find wet footprints leading from the lake's edge, straight to my porch. And that's when I realized whatever took that man wasn't gone. It had followed me home. 3 nights later, I couldn't resist. The sound under the floorboards had gotten louder, like something dragging across the wood. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside into the bitter wind. The snow crunched under my boots as I followed the wet footprints back to the lake. The ice glimmered under the moonlight, smooth, perfect, undisturbed, until I saw it. Just beneath the surface, something pale pressed against the ice. I knelt closer and realized it was a face, bloated, half frozen, eyes open. The same man from that night. His mouth was wide, as if he'd been screaming when the lake swallowed him. Then the ice shifted, a deep, cracking sound echoing from below. I stumbled back. The man's head turned slightly, just enough for me to see frost flake off his skin. He was moving. I ran home, heart pounding so hard I could barely breathe. I didn't tell anyone. No one in Coldwater would believe me anyway. They'd just say, "The lake takes what it wants." The next day, I went to see Mr. Harker, an old fisherman who'd lived by the lake his entire life. Everyone said he was crazy, but he'd once pulled something from the lake that left him half blind. When I told him what I saw, his expression darkened. He poured a shot of whiskey, downed it, and said, "You shouldn't have looked into its eyes, boy." The lake remembers faces. He told me Coldwater Lake used to be a cemetery, long before the dam flooded the valley in the 1940s. The bodies were never moved. They were buried under the water. "Sometimes," he said, "the dead want to come home." Before I left, he grabbed my wrist with an icy grip. "When you dream of the water, don't let it touch you. If you do, you'll wake up drowning." That night, I dreamt of standing on the lake again. The frozen surface beneath my feet was clear as glass, and faces pressed against it from below, whispering my name. I woke up gasping, my sheets soaked as though I'd been underwater. The clock read 3:17 a.m. I went to the window and froze. A man was standing in my yard. He wasn't moving, just watching the house. The same torn coat, same boots from that night on the lake. His skin was gray, like wet paper, and water dripped from his sleeves onto the snow. He raised one hand slowly and pointed, not at me, but at the door. Before I could react, the knocking began. Slow, heavy, thud, thud, thud. Each knock rattled the frame harder. I backed away, grabbed the phone, deadline. I hid under the window until dawn, heart racing with every sound. When the sun finally rose, the snow outside was untouched. No footprints, no trail, no sign anyone had ever been there. But when I opened the door, a puddle of lake water spread across the floorboards. By morning, I'd had enough. I went straight to the sheriff's office, but the moment I mentioned the lake, his smile faded. "We don't talk about that," he muttered. "You hear me, Evan?" Let it be. I didn't understand until later that day, when I overheard him and my father talking behind the diner. "The boy's seen it," my father said. The sheriff sighed. "Then it's already marked him." That night, my father packed our bags without explanation. He said we'd leave before dawn. But as we loaded the truck, the headlights flickered, and I saw something standing by the tree line. Dozens of shapes, pale and still, like people frozen mid-step. Then one moved, twisting its head unnaturally toward me. Its mouth opened, and I heard the sound of rushing water, even though the air was still. I blinked, and they were gone. We never left that night. The truck wouldn't start. The next day, I woke up alone. My father's bed was empty, his boots gone. I searched the house, then the woods. Fresh tracks led toward the lake. By the time I reached the shore, the morning fog was thick as milk. My father stood in the middle of the frozen lake, barefoot. His eyes were open, blank, his body perfectly still. "Dad!" I screamed. But when I stepped onto the ice, I felt something pulling from below. The surface trembled under my feet, vibrating like a heartbeat. My father began to sink, the ice folding around him like water. I sprinted forward, but before I could reach him, his hand vanished beneath the surface. The only thing left behind was a single boot floating on the ice. I collapsed, sobbing. That's when I heard a whisper. Faint, watery, calling my name from beneath. For 2 days, I stayed locked inside, terrified. The townspeople acted like nothing had happened. I begged for help, but no one would even meet my eyes. On the third night, I saw movement at the lake again. Not one figure this time. Many. Dozens of pale shapes standing beneath the surface, visible through the thin ice. Men, women, even children, their faces distorted by the water. And at the center of them all was my father, eyes open, mouth moving like he was trying to speak. I pressed my ear against the glass and heard whispering, hundreds of voices speaking in a language I couldn't understand. Then the ice began to crack. I ran, but before I reached the tree line, something brushed my ankle, a wet, freezing hand reaching out from a hole in the ice. By now, I knew there was no escaping it. Whatever lived beneath Coldwater Lake wanted me. Every night, the knocking returned, louder, faster. My lights flickered, water leaked from the ceiling, and the air stank of rot. I tried to leave town, but every road looped back to the lake. The gas station was empty, the diner abandoned. It was as if the town itself had frozen in time, trapped in an endless winter. The final night, I sat by the window with my father's old rifle. The knocking began again, but this time it wasn't the door. It was the walls, the floor, the roof, like the whole house was underwater. And then I saw it, a figure forming from the water pooling on my floor, taking shape, rising. The same pale eyes, the same torn coat. The lake had come inside. I fired once. The sound drowned by the crash of water bursting through the windows. Freezing lake water poured in, dragging me across the floor. I screamed, clawing for the stairs, but the current pulled me down. Through the chaos, I saw faces swirling in the dark water. All the missing townsfolk, their mouths open, whispering bubbles that rose like prayers. Then I saw him, my father, reaching for me. His lips moved, forming one word: run. The water swallowed me whole. For a moment, I felt nothing but silence. And then I woke up on the shore. The house was gone. The town was gone. Just endless snow in the still, frozen lake. I never went back. But sometimes, when I dream, I hear the water again and see those faces beneath the ice, waiting. My name is Lauren, and 3 years ago, I moved to a small town called Hollow Creek in British Columbia. I wanted peace, a quiet place to start over after my divorce. The town was picturesque. Snowy mountains in the distance, pine forests all around, and a creek that wound like a silver snake through the valley. My cabin sat right beside that creek. The realtor had warned me about the floods and told me not to leave my windows open at night. I laughed then. The first week was calm, just the sound of running water, the smell of pine, and the occasional coyote cry. Then one night, while I was reading by the fire, I heard a voice outside. It wasn't quite human. A faint whisper, carried by the wind, saying my name. Lauren! I froze. The sound came again, this time from the direction of the creek. I turned off the lights, peered out the window, and saw ripples moving against the current. The next morning, I checked the creek. The air was sharp and cold, the water unusually high. But there were no footprints, no sign of animals. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been there. That night, the whisper returned. It was louder, like 100 voices beneath the water murmuring together. I tried recording it on my phone, but when I played it back, all I heard was static and faint laughter underneath. By the third night, sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I dreamt of faces, pale, half-drowned faces rising through the current. When I'd wake up, my sheets would be damp, as if water had seeped in. Then I found something strange near the creek. A small wooden cross sticking out of the mud, half rotted. Carved into it were the words, "Forgive us." And right beneath it, a handprint, perfectly pressed into the frozen ground. The only neighbor close enough to hear me scream was an old woman named Mrs. Dyer, who lived half a mile up the road. When I told her about the voices, she just stared for a long time, then said, "You're living on the old mill ground." She told me the story. Back in the 1920s, there was a paper mill along Hollow Creek. Dozens of workers drowned when the dam burst. The whole mill washed away, their bodies never found. Since then, people claim to hear voices at night, especially when the water ran high. Before I left, she gripped my hand hard and said, "If you hear your name again, don't answer. It's not who you think it is." That night, I sat by the window, staring at the dark creek. The wind howled through the trees, and then, clear as day, I heard it. Not one voice, but two, both whispering in unison. "Lauren, come help us." I tried to ignore the whispers. I played music, slept with earplugs, even left the lights on all night. But the sound always found its way in. Through the walls, through the floor, through the pipes. One night, I noticed something strange. When the whispering started, the water pressure dropped. The faucet would hiss, then release bursts of muddy water. Once, I swear I saw a strand of black hair floating out of it. I called a plumber from the next town, but when he crawled under the house, he came out white as chalk. "Ma'am," he said, "your pipes, they're filled with creek water. But you don't have a line from the creek." That night, the whispering turned into singing. Low, rhythmic, like a lullaby carried through water. It was almost beautiful. I went outside, drawn to the sound. The creek glowed faintly blue, and beneath the surface, shadows moved. The next morning, I decided I needed proof. I set up my phone by the window facing the creek and left it recording overnight. When I played it back the next day, I heard what I expected. Faint whispers, like wind through reeds. But at the 3:12 mark, something changed. A voice came through, clear and desperate. "It wasn't our fault." Then another followed, deeper, almost angry. "She's one of them." I dropped the phone. The recording ended with a sound I'll never forget. Splashing footsteps, like someone walking slowly through the creek, toward the house. That night, I packed my things. I planned to leave before sunset. But when I opened the door, the air smelled of wet earth and decay. My front steps were covered in muddy footprints, leading from the creek, straight to my bed. I drove into town and went straight to the sheriff's office. When I told him about the voices and the footprints, he didn't look surprised, just tired. He reached into his desk and pulled out a folder thick with yellowed papers. Inside were photos, black and white, of the mill disaster Mrs. Dyer had mentioned. Bodies lined up on the banks, faces bloated, hands still clutching tools. But what caught my eye was the last photo. A woman standing by the wreckage, soaked and smiling, her eyes completely white. The sheriff said, "That's Clara Bell. She was the mill owner's wife. When the dam broke, she refused to leave. Said she'd stay with her workers. Folks claim she still calls out to strangers when the creek runs high." He leaned closer and whispered, "The land you bought? That's where her house stood." My stomach dropped. When I got home that night, the water in my sink was already running, dark and slow, like blood. That night, I dreamt of the mill. I stood on a wooden bridge as rain poured from the sky. Below, the creek raged, swollen and black. Workers screamed as the dam cracked open, waves swallowing everything in sight. Then I saw her, Clara Bell, standing in the water, her white eyes reflecting lightning. She smiled at me and whispered, "You came back." I woke up gasping, my floor wet beneath my feet. Outside it was raining for real, harder than I'd ever seen. The creek had risen so high it was almost level with the yard. As thunder roared, a voice called from outside my window, "Help us, Lauren." But this time, I could see them. Faint shapes in the water, dozens of them, reaching out, faces pale and drifting just below the surface. By morning, the entire property was half submerged. The creek had overflowed into my yard, swallowing the fence and creeping toward the cabin steps. I tried calling for help. No signal. Even the radio played only static. I started hearing voices inside the walls. The same whispers, but closer now. They echoed through the vents, the sink, the drain. Every drop of water in the house seemed to have a voice. When I looked into the bathroom mirror, condensation had formed words across the glass. "Let us in." The moment I wiped it away, the lights flickered, and I saw a face behind me in the reflection, soaked and grinning. I spun around. Nothing. Just dripping water running down the tiles. Then the floorboards groaned, and cold water began seeping up between the cracks. I realized, too late, that the creek wasn't flooding my yard. It was pulling my house under. By nightfall, the water had reached my knees. Furniture floated. The air smelled of rot. I climbed onto the table, clutching my flashlight as the voices filled the room. Hundreds of whispers blending into one deep hum. Then, through the open doorway to the porch, I saw her. Clara Bell. She was standing waist deep in the water, her dress drifting around her like smoke. Her skin glowed faintly blue, and where her eyes should have been were two hollow sockets glowing white. She lifted her arms, and the water rose with her, swirling upward in a spiral. Faces formed within the current. Men, women, children, all staring at me. "Come with us," she said softly. "It's been so long." The water reached my chest. I tried to scream, but icy hands grabbed my legs, pulling me down. I woke up at dawn, lying in the middle of the road, drenched and freezing. My cabin was gone, completely washed away. The creek had receded, calm and silent, as if nothing had happened. The sheriff found me hours later. He said there'd been no storm, no flood warnings, just clear skies all night. When they took me to where my home used to be, I saw nothing but a patch of mud and an old wooden cross sticking out of the ground. The same one that read, "Forgive us." Now, years later, I still hear Hollow Creek in my dreams. Sometimes I wake up to the sound of running water, and once, I swear I heard a woman's voice whisper through the drain pipe, "You came back." It was almost midnight when I pulled off the frozen highway and saw the flickering neon sign. Frostvale Motel, vacancy. The snowstorm had turned the world white. My wipers screeched against the windshield and the radio whispered static. I'd been driving for hours through the Canadian Rockies, and this rundown motel was the only sign of life for miles. Inside, the lobby smelled of old wood and coffee gone bad. Behind the counter stood an elderly man with clouded eyes. He didn't greet me, didn't smile. He just slid a key across the counter, room 7. As I turned to leave, he finally spoke. "If you hear knocking during the night, don't answer." I forced a nervous laugh, but his expression didn't change. His pale eyes followed me until I disappeared into the icy hallway. Room 7 was cold. The wallpaper peeled like old skin. When I lay down, the heater clicked twice, then stopped. Silence filled the room. Then, just past 1 a.m., 3 slow knocks echoed from inside the wall behind my bed. I sat up, heart pounding. The knocks came again. 3 slow, hollow thuds, perfectly spaced. I pressed my ear to the wall. Nothing but cold silence. I knocked back once. The response came instantly. 3 knocks again, this time closer, louder, like something shifting inside the wall itself. I grabbed my flashlight and crouched down near the floorboards. A faint draft leaked through a crack in the wall, carrying with it a smell of damp rot. And something else. Something metallic. When I shone my light through the gap, I saw something move. Pale fingers curling back into the dark. I stumbled backward, my breath misting in the frozen air. The knocking stopped. But for the rest of the night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing faint breathing, like someone lying right behind the wall, matching my every inhale and exhale. By dawn, I'd made up my mind. I was leaving. But when I looked out the window, I saw something carved into the snow just outside my door. A single word. Stay. I went back to the front desk, but the old man wasn't there. Just an old bell and a guest book filled with faded names. None newer than 1993. When I turned to leave, the door behind the counter creaked open on its own. I shouldn't have, but curiosity pulled me inside. It was a maintenance hallway lined with old cleaning supplies and frozen pipes. Near the end, I found it. A wooden door nailed shut with rusted boards. The smell of decay oozed from behind it. I pried one board loose and peered through a narrow gap. What I saw made my stomach twist. A room identical to mine, but the walls were black with soot. In the corner stood a bed frame, and chained to it, something that moved. It was humanoid but wrong. Too long, too thin, its skin gray and glistening like ice. It turned toward me slowly, and I saw the hole in its face, where a mouth should have been. From that hole came the sound of knocking. I ran. Back in my room, I packed up fast. As I zipped my bag, a dusty photo album slid out from under the bed. I froze. I hadn't seen it there before. I opened it. The first few pages were normal. Tourists posing outside the motel in the 70s, smiling in the snow. But the later photos changed. The faces were pale, eyes wide, mouths gaping. The last photo made my skin crawl. Room 7, my room. In the picture, someone stood at the window, watching from behind the curtains. Someone who looked exactly like me. A shiver crawled up my spine. I dropped the album. But when it hit the floor, the heater clicked on again. Only this time, the air that blew out wasn't warm. It was freezing cold, reeking of rot. And faintly, through the vent, I heard a whisper. Not a voice, but a dozen voices layered together. Don't leave us here. I went to the bathroom to splash water on my face. The mirror was fogged, though the air was freezing. I wiped it clean and froze. My reflection didn't move. It stared back at me, eyes dull and sunken. Then slowly, it smiled. A grotesque, twitching grin that split its cheeks too wide. Its hand pressed against the glass, fingertips black like frostbite. I stumbled back, knocking over a towel rack. My reflection stayed in place for a moment longer, then tilted its head, as if studying me. The mirror began to vibrate, tiny cracks spreading from the corners. I heard the faint echo of knocking again, but this time it came from inside the mirror. I threw a towel over it and bolted out of the bathroom. The room felt wrong, colder, darker. My own breath looked like smoke. When I turned toward the window, I froze again. Outside, standing ankle-deep in the snow, was my reflection, watching me from outside the glass. I stormed into the lobby, shouting for the old man. The front desk was empty. except for an old rotary phone ringing softly. When I answered, his voice rasped through static. "You opened the wall, didn't you?" I demanded to know what was happening, but he just wheezed out a sigh. They built this motel on the site of an asylum fire. The bodies, they were never buried, just sealed behind walls to save money. But they don't rest easy along silence. Then, faintly, I heard knocking echoing through the line. That same slow rhythm. The voice continued, breaking apart like static. They took my eyes first, then they started taking guests. The line went dead. I turned toward the door behind the counter, the one leading to the hidden hallway. It was open again. From the darkness beyond came the faint sound of dragging footsteps. Getting closer, I ran behind the counter and down the hall, flashlight trembling in my hand. The dragging sound grew louder, wetter, like something pulling itself through mud. The hallway ended in a metal hatch leading downward. The basement. It was half open, the hinges crusted with frost. Against every instinct, I climbed down. The beam of my flashlight cut through damp air. The floor was concrete, slick with black ice. In the center stood a rusted gurney, and on it, a body bag that moved. I inched closer. The zipper began to slide down on its own. Inside wasn't a body, it was a mirror, fogged and cracked. My reflection looked back at me again, only now it wasn't mimicking me. It was reaching out, hand pressing against the glass from the inside. When its palm touched the surface, my flashlight flickered, and the reflection's fingers pushed through the glass, dripping black water. I screamed and stumbled backward, dropping the light. The basement went pitch black. Pitch. When the flashlight flickered back on, I wasn't in the basement anymore. I was standing in room 7 again. But the room had changed. The wallpaper was burned away, leaving charred black walls. The floor was covered in soot and ash. My bag was gone. The window was bricked over. The bed frame stood in the center, and chained to it was the old man, or what was left of him. His face was pale, his eyes hollow sockets. His lips moved, whispering, "They want you now." The chains rattled, and a dozen pale arms reached out from the walls, melting faces forming in the plaster, eyes blinking open. They began crawling toward me, whispering my name, Evan, over and over. I lunged for the door, but when I opened it, there was no hallway, only the endless dark. I woke up outside in the snow, gasping. The motel was silent behind me, its windows black and lifeless. My car was still parked where I'd left it, half buried under snow. I got in, started the engine, and drove until the sun came up. I didn't look back once, but when I reached the next town and stopped at a gas station, the clerk gave me a confused look. "Where'd you come from?" "The Frostvale Motel," I said. He frowned. "Kid, that place burned down in 1994. Everyone in it died. You sure you're okay?" My stomach dropped. I turned toward the station's window. In the reflection, the motel was still there, behind me, perfectly intact, its neon sign flickering. And in that reflection, I wasn't alone in the car. Someone sat in the back seat, smiling. It's been months since that night. I never told anyone the full story. Who'd believe it? But sometimes, when the temperature drops and frost creeps up my windows, I still hear it. 3 slow knocks. Last night, I finally looked outside. Parked across the street was an old car, half covered in snow. Inside, through the frosted windshield, I saw someone sitting, perfectly still, smiling faintly. I tried to turn away, but then I heard it again, this time from inside my house. The same rhythm, the same cold, the same whisper. Room 7. I walked toward the sound, my breath fogging the air. And there, on my living room wall, was a faint outline, like plaster had shifted. Then 3 knocks echoed once more from inside the wall. My name is Claire, and I used to live in a remote town in Nova Scotia called Ravenscreek, a place wrapped in mist and silence. The heart of our town was a crumbling stone church, its bell tower looming above everything like a crooked finger reaching toward the clouds. The bell hadn't rung in 50 years, or so we thought. One winter night, around midnight, I woke to the faint sound of the bell tolling, deep, metallic, and impossibly distant. I looked outside, and through the falling snow, the church stood dark. Yet the bell swayed gently, like something unseen was pulling it. The next morning, the townsfolk whispered that old Mrs. Halley, the caretaker, had died in her sleep. By the end of that week, 3 more people were gone, and every death was preceded by that same midnight toll. Everyone in Ravenscreek said it was a warning, that when the bell rings again, the church is calling for another soul. After Mrs. Halley's funeral, I visited the church to help clean out her belongings. The air inside was heavy, smelling of dust and candle wax. Her small room behind the altar was cluttered with old hymn books, photographs, and one strange item: a wooden box with metal clasps and a name burned into the lid: Elias. Inside were yellowed pages from an old journal. Her handwriting trembled across each line. The bell does not ring by rope or wind. It tolls for the guilty. My hands shook as I flipped the pages. One passage was written in smeared ink, like she'd tried to erase it. I hear them climbing again, the ones who hang from the ropes. That night, I dreamt of the bell tower, the rope swinging wildly, though no one was there. I woke gasping to the faint echo of a toll. When I looked out my window, I saw a shadow moving inside the church steeple. The next day, curiosity won over fear. I went back to the church with my flashlight. Snow crunched underfoot as I approached. Inside, the silence was so deep, I could hear my own pulse. The staircase to the bell tower spiraled upward, each step groaning like bones. I climbed carefully, brushing away cobwebs. Halfway up, I noticed something carved into the wall: names. Dozens of them, scratched deep into the stone. Some were fresh. At the top, the bell loomed above me, enormous and blackened by age. The rope hung still. I reached out to touch it, and it twitched under my fingers. A soft voice whispered near my ear, "You shouldn't be here." I spun around. No one. Only the bell rope swaying gently as if breathing. I turned to go back down and froze. There, on the last step, was a footprint in the dust. Bare, wet, and it was pointing up. That night, the entire town gathered at the diner. Another person, the butcher's son, had died suddenly in his sleep. Heart failure, they said. But his name, Elias, was one I'd seen carved inside the bell tower. I checked the photos I'd taken earlier on my phone, and something didn't add up. Elias's name was gone. The carving had vanished from the wall completely. The bell rang again that midnight. I counted the tolls, 4. The next morning, 4 new names appeared carved into the church doors, one of them mine. The letters were rough and deep, almost clawed in. Beneath each name was a date, tomorrow's date. I tried to tell the sheriff, but he just stared at me with blank eyes. "Best not to talk about it, Claire," he muttered. "No one talks about the bell." When I got home, I found dirt on my doormat, fresh black soil, and the faint sound of a rope tightening somewhere above my ceiling. Desperate, I went through Mrs. Halley's box again. At the bottom was an old photograph. The church in the 1920s, surrounded by villagers. The strange part? Everyone in the picture had their heads tilted down, except one boy staring straight at the camera. His eyes were white, his mouth stretched in a faint, unnatural smile. On the back, in faded ink, someone had written, "He rang the bell." That night, I woke to the sound of my window creaking open. The curtains moved, though no wind blew. When I approached, I saw a reflection. The boy from the photo, standing behind me. He whispered, "It's almost your turn." Then, from across the valley, the church bell began to toll. Soft at first, then louder. With every chime, the reflection's grin grew wider, until his mouth stretched from ear to ear. At dawn, I packed my car and drove toward the highway. The snow thickened, covering the road like white fog. But no matter how far I went, the same church steeple appeared ahead, leaning, shadowed, and wrong. My GPS glitched, the signal looping back to Ravens Creek. My hands trembled as I realized I was driving in circles. When I stopped to catch my breath, I saw someone standing in the road, the old caretaker, Mrs. Halley. Her eyes were hollow, skin gray, mouth whispering words I couldn't hear. I rolled down the window slightly, and she rasped, "You can't leave?" You've already heard the bell behind her. The church appeared again, closer this time. The bell swung wildly, though there was no wind. And over the roar of the storm came one more toll. When I woke, I was back in my bed. The clock read 11:50 p.m. My head ached, my neck burned. I ran to the mirror and froze. Faint rope marks circled my throat, raw and red. I tried to scream, but my voice came out hoarse, strangled. My reflection blinked a second too late, then began to smile. At exactly midnight, the first toll echoed. The sound came not from outside, but from inside my walls. Each ring shook the house, dust falling from the ceiling. I backed away, clutching my throat until I hit something cold. The bell rope, hanging from nowhere, swaying slowly. When I looked up, there was no ceiling, only darkness, and the faint outline of a tower above my house. And from that tower, something began to climb down. I ran outside barefoot into the snow, gasping for air. The whole town was silent, windows dark. Overhead, the church bell tolled again, louder, closer, until it felt like it was ringing inside my skull. I turned toward the church. Shadows were moving up its walls, hundreds of them, human-shaped, dragging themselves higher with invisible ropes. Some were missing faces. Some had no heads at all. And at the top, just below the bell, one figure was climbing downward, reaching for me. Its mouth hung open in a scream that made no sound. I fell to my knees, snow soaking my skin, as the shadows began to drop from the tower, landing silently, one by one. They started walking toward me. Their eyes glowed faintly like embers. And when they opened their mouths, the tolling bell stopped. I remember falling backward into the snow. The shadows surrounded me, whispering in voices that sounded like the people who had died. Mrs. Halley, Elias, the butcher's son. They lifted me toward the sky, and for a moment, I saw inside the bell. It wasn't metal at all. It was bone, carved with faces frozen mid-scream. The final toll rang out. 6. When I opened my eyes, the sun was rising over Ravens Creek. The church was gone, the snow untouched. My house stood silent, my name no longer carved on the door. But in my reflection, I saw something new. A faint rope mark around my throat, fading slowly. And behind me, through the window glass, the bell tower stood tall again, its bell perfectly still. It's been months. I left Ravenscreek, changed my name, tried to forget. But last night, while scrolling through a local news site, a headline caught my eye. Church bell rings again in abandoned Ravenscreek. The article mentioned new victims, tourists this time. I stared at the photo they'd used. The reflection in the church window showed a woman standing near the tower, me. I shut my laptop and froze. Outside my window, snow was falling again. Somewhere far away, the faint sound of a bell echoed. One toll, I covered my ears. 2 tolls. My lights flickered. 3 tolls. Then came the knock at my door, slow, deliberate, heavy. 4. My name is Ethan, and I've never believed in curses or haunted houses. But that was before I took a wrong turn one February night while driving through northern Ontario. Snow came down like ash, heavy and endless. My GPS flickered, then died completely. I was miles from any town when I saw a single yellow porch light glowing through the blizzard. Desperate for warmth, I parked near a crooked mailbox that read, Thorn. The house looked ancient, boards warped, windows fogged with frost. Yet the porch light burned steady, inviting. I knocked. No answer. But when I pushed the door, it creaked open. Inside, the air was stale, heavy with rot and dust. Furniture was covered in sheets, and the only sound was a faint ticking. A clock somewhere deep inside. Then a whisper, soft but clear. You made it back. I froze. The door slammed shut behind me. And when I turned toward the sound, I saw footprints appearing in the dust, one by one, leading up the stairs. I told myself it had to be the wind or my imagination. But the footprints kept forming, pressing down the dust one after another, slow and deliberate. I backed away, heart pounding, but the whisper came again. Closer now. It's been so long, Ethan. I hadn't told anyone my name. The floorboards above creaked. Something was moving, dragging across the old wooden hallway. I spotted a framed photo on the wall, a faded picture of a family. A man, a woman, and a boy who looked exactly like me. The air grew colder. My breath turned to mist. I ran to the front door, pulling hard. It wouldn't budge. The knob felt like ice, burning my hand. That's when I noticed the dust on the floor forming words, slowly spelling, "Welcome home." My flashlight flickered, and from the top of the stairs, a shadow leaned forward. Tall, motionless, watching. I followed the shadow upstairs, though every step felt heavier than the last. The hall smelled faintly of old wood and candle wax. At the end of it was a door slightly ajar, a faint orange glow spilling through the crack. Inside, dozens of portraits lined the walls, oil paintings of faces I didn't recognize. Each face stared blankly outward, and in every one, the eyes seemed wet, freshly painted. One painting at the center caught my breath. It was me. Not me as I was, but older, my skin gray and hollow, my eyes dead. Beneath the frame, written in gold paint, "The Last Thorn." Suddenly the house groaned as though alive. The air thickened, pressing on my chest. I stumbled back, and every portrait's eyes began to move, turning to follow me. Then, from behind the largest painting, came the slow scraping sound of nails on wood, as if something was trying to claw its way out. I ran from the portrait room, my flashlight flickering wildly. The hallway stretched longer than before, impossibly long. I passed door after door, each slightly open, each whispering faint voices behind it. When I finally reached the end, there was one door different from the rest, made of iron, padlocked shut. Etched across it were the same words from before. "Welcome home." The padlock looked rusted, ancient, but the metal was freezing cold. As I touched it, my vision blurred, and suddenly I saw flashes. A boy playing in the snow outside this house, a woman calling him in, a man ringing a small handbell. The images faded, replaced by the whisper again. "You promised you'd never leave us." I stumbled back, gasping for air. The walls seemed to breathe, wood pulsing softly, like veins beneath skin. Then the padlock snapped open on its own. The door creaked ajar, releasing a blast of icy wind that smelled like grave dirt. The iron door led to a narrow staircase spiraling downward into blackness. The air was cold, wet, and smelled of soil. Each step groaned as if warning me to turn back. My flashlight's beam trembled against stone walls slick with moisture. I descended until I reached a small chamber. There was a table, a lantern, and 3 chairs. Dust lay thick over everything except for one thing, a wooden box sitting neatly at the center. Carved into its lid was my name, Ethan Thorne. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside were black and white photographs of the same family I saw upstairs. Only now every face was scratched out, except for the boy. Me. Beneath the photos, a note. "If you read this, you've come home to finish what we started." The lantern flickered. Behind me, something exhaled, long and heavy. When I turned, the staircase was gone, replaced by solid stone. I wasn't alone anymore. I pressed my back to the wall, scanning the dark. A faint whisper echoed, too many voices, speaking at once, overlapping like a broken recording. "Stay. Stay. Stay." I stumbled toward the lantern, trying to steady my breath. The light pulsed with every heartbeat. Then I saw movement, dozens of hands pressed against the walls, their pale fingers reaching out through cracks in the stone. I screamed and struck one with the lantern. The flame burst, light scattering across the room. And for a split second, I saw them clearly. Figures fused into the walls, their faces twisted, eyes open, silently mouthing my name. The note in my hand burned hot. I dropped it, and it crumbled into ash. The whispers stopped. Then a calm, clear voice spoke from the dark. "They built this place for you." I turned toward the voice and saw my reflection in the lantern glass. Only the reflection smiled back. A hidden door cracked open in the wall where the reflection had been. I stepped through into another room, small, square, and lined entirely with old mirrors. Each mirror was fogged, but when I wiped one clean, I didn't see myself. I saw the boy from the photos. He stood in a winter coat, snow in his hair, staring back at me. Behind him, I could see this same house, only newer, alive. He spoke, but his voice echoed inside my head. "You were never supposed to leave." The mirrors rippled, and suddenly I was standing in a living version of the house, clean, warm, lit by sunlight. A woman smiled from the kitchen. A man sat by the fire. Both looked at me with love. Then the boy entered, grinning. He was me, only younger. "Now you remember," he said. "You were the first one who died here." The illusion shattered like glass. I was back in the decayed version of the house, mirrors cracked, and the boy gone. The portraits on the walls outside now showed every family member smiling, except mine. My frame was still empty. As I staggered through the hall, I noticed the walls bleeding faint black liquid. The smell was metallic, like rust and soil. Every step I took, the house moaned louder, its foundation shaking. Then I saw her, the woman from the photo, standing at the end of the hallway. Her face was soft, pale, and she whispered, "Finish it." She held out a small handbell, the same one from my vision. When she rang it, every door in the house slammed shut at once, and the whispering voices screamed in unison. The house wasn't haunted. It was feeding. The floors buckled as the house's frame groaned like a living beast. I fell to my knees, covering my ears as the bell's sound grew deafening. Shadows poured from the walls, taking human shapes, the same faces from the portraits, circling me. "The last thorn returns," they hissed. I tried to run, but the floorboards beneath me split open. Cold hands clawed at my ankles, pulling me down into darkness. Through the chaos, I saw the boy again, holding the bell, smiling wide. "Don't fight it. You belong here." The woods swallowed me whole. I screamed until my voice broke. Then silence. I awoke standing in the portrait room again, staring at a new painting on the wall. It was me, frozen in fear, eyes lifeless. The nameplate below read, "Ethan Thorne returned." The next morning, a snowplow driver spotted my car on Black Pine Road. Engine still running, doors wide open, snow covering the seats. I was never found. Locals say that if you drive that way on a snowy night, you'll see the porch light of the Thorne house glowing faintly through the storm. Sometimes, a man stands in the window, pale, motionless, staring at the road. And if you stop to look too long, the light will go out, and the bell will ring once. Those who hear it don't make it home. They say the house chooses new names now, and if you listen closely beneath the wind, you'll hear a faint whisper carried from the trees. Welcome home. My name is Caleb, and I've worked as a long-haul truck driver across Canada for nearly 15 years. The winters never bothered me, until that night on Highway 313, just north of Manitoba's border. A snowstorm had rolled in fast. Wind screamed across the plains like a living thing, shaking the cab of my rig. My radio had gone dead miles ago, and the GPS kept flashing a single message. No signal. Then, through the white blur, I saw it, a flicker of neon, a gas station sign, half buried in snow. It read, "Martin Service, since 1957. I hadn't seen it on any map, but my tank was nearly empty. I pulled off the road and parked beside a single, flickering light pole. The building looked abandoned, the windows frosted, the door slightly open, creaking in the wind. But from inside, I could hear a faint hum, like an engine idling somewhere deep below the floor. I called out, "Hello? Anyone here?" And from the back of the store came a voice, low, trembling, and very human. "You shouldn't have stopped." The voice came from behind the counter, a man sitting in a dusty parka, head bowed, hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. "Road's closed up ahead," he said without looking up. "You can't go on tonight." His voice cracked on every other word, dry and tired. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. "I just need some gas," I said. "I'll pay whatever it costs." He finally looked up. His eyes were pale gray, almost colorless. "Ain't no gas here," he said softly. "Hasn't been for years." A chill ran through me. The heater in the building wasn't working, yet the air felt thick and warm. The hum I'd heard earlier grew louder, vibrating through the floor. The man's hands shook as he pointed to the back room. "You'll find what you came for there." When I turned toward the hallway, I saw boot prints leading across the dusty floor. But there was only one set, and they ended halfway to the door. The rest of the steps just stopped. I followed the prints to the back door, my flashlight cutting through layers of dust and cobwebs. The air was humid and smelled faintly of burnt oil. When I pushed the door open, I found a staircase descending underground, lit by a single swinging bulb. The hum was louder now, rhythmic, almost mechanical. Halfway down, I noticed the walls. They weren't concrete, they were metal, smooth and cold to the touch. The further I went, the more it looked like some kind of tunnel, leading far beneath the building. At the bottom was a massive steel door, half rusted and bolted shut. Scratched into it were dozens of names, each etched by hand. Near the bottom, one name stood out. Caleb Moore, that was my name. I stumbled back, heart pounding, when something behind the door started knocking. Slow, deliberate. Then, from the top of the stairs, the old man's voice called down. "It remembers you." The knocking turned rhythmic, like a heartbeat echoing through the steel. I stood frozen, flashlight trembling in my hand. Then came a scraping sound, followed by a faint voice whispering through the cracks. "You left me here, Caleb." I stumbled back up the stairs, my boots clanging on metal. But when I reached the main floor, the man was gone. The cup of coffee still sat on the counter, steaming now. I ran outside, but the storm had worsened. My truck was gone. The parking lot stretched empty into pure white nothingness. Panic clawed at my chest. I turned back toward the gas station and noticed something that hadn't been there before. The sign's neon letters no longer read Martin's Service. They spelled out Moore's Station. I stumbled back, breath fogging the air. And through the falling snow, I saw figures standing along the road, half buried, motionless. All of them were facing me. The snow burned against my face as I tried to orient myself. There was nothing, no tracks, no truck, no sign of any road I'd come from, just endless white. The figures I'd seen before were still standing along the roadside. Closer now. I counted 7 of them. None moved, but I could feel their eyes on me. Their bodies looked stiff, brittle, like ice sculptures shaped from people. Then one tilted its head. The sound was sharp, like cracking ice. I backed toward the station, fumbling for the door handle, but it swung open before I touched it. Warm air poured out. Too warm, like the inside of an engine. The old man's voice echoed faintly. "You left it open last time, Caleb." That's why it never stopped humming. I looked down at my boots. The snow beneath them was melting, revealing black asphalt and bones just beneath the surface. Inside, the hum had become deafening. I followed it through a door marked Employees Only. A long metal corridor led deeper underground, vibrating slightly beneath my feet. The air smelled of oil and rust, but also decay. At the end of the hallway was a massive room filled with machinery. Rusted pistons, turning gears, belts still moving though no power source was visible. The walls were wet and pulsing softly, as if they were alive. In the center stood a cylindrical engine, black as coal, its surface covered in carvings that looked almost human. Faces twisted in agony, mouths open in silent screams. The hum came from it. When I stepped closer, my flashlight flickered, and I saw something moving inside the glass compartment. A shape suspended in dark fluid. It was me. Eyes closed, floating, mouth slightly open. The hum changed pitch, forming words I didn't want to hear. "You never left." I stumbled backward, heart slamming in my chest. My flashlight dropped, clattering across the metal floor. For a moment, the lights dimmed. Then everything shifted. The humming stopped. Silence fell, thick and suffocating. When I looked up again, the figure inside the glass wasn't there. "Caleb," a voice whispered behind me. I turned and came face to face with myself. Same jacket, same scars, same terrified eyes. He looked exhausted, trembling, covered in frost. "You shouldn't have come back," he said quietly. "It keeps us here." Always. Every time we stop, I stared, unable to speak. He pointed toward the engine. "It feeds on memory. Every mile you drive, you bring it something new." The lights flickered again. My double smiled sadly. This time, it chose you. Then he stepped backward into the engine's shadow and disappeared. The hum resumed, louder than before. I ran. The tunnel seemed endless now, stretching farther than physics should allow. Each light above me flickered in sequence, as if following me. When I burst into the gas station shop again, everything had changed. The shelves were full, stocked with food, drinks, and maps from decades ago. The air was warm and clean. A bell rang above the door. Someone had entered. It was a woman, dressed in a red coat dusted with snow. She smiled nervously. "Hey, do you sell gas?" My car broke down on the highway. I froze. I knew her face. I'd seen her photo in my truck, taped to the dashboard. It was my wife. She frowned. "Are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost behind her." The neon sign flickered outside the window. It now read, "Martin's Service since 1957. And faintly beneath it, in smaller letters, something began to appear, glowing red. "More family owned." The radio behind the counter crackled to life, blaring static, then a calm male voice. "Severe blizzard warning remains in effect for Highway 313. All travel is suspended until further notice. Drivers are advised to seek shelter." The woman looked at me. "You hear that?" "We should wait it out." I couldn't move. I could only stare at the walls, which now pulsed faintly with every word on the radio. The hum from below returned, vibrating through the floor. I whispered, "We have to go." She shook her head. "Go where, Caleb?" "We're already here." Then the radio spoke again, this time in my own voice. "You never left the station, Caleb. The road's been closed since 1957. I turned to her, but she was gone. The door swung open, snow swirling in, and I caught my reflection in the window. Pale, gray-eyed, and smiling just like the old man from before. Days later, Highway Patrol found a truck buried in snow near mile marker 313. The engine was still running, cab empty, heater blasting. No sign of the driver. They say that sometimes, during whiteouts, drivers see a faint neon sign glowing ahead. An old gas station that shouldn't exist. Some stop for warmth. Some even speak to a tired old man inside. None of them make it home. And when the storm clears, there's always a new sign half buried in the snow. Freshly painted letters. Moore's Service since 1957. If you're ever driving through northern Manitoba and the snow gets too thick to see, don't stop. Because once you pull into that station, you never really leave. My name's Ethan Brooks, and I used to work as a forest guide in the Yukon Territory. The kind of wilderness where the sun vanishes for weeks and silence feels alive. In 2015, a group of 4 tourists from Vancouver hired me to lead them into the Duskwood Creek area. Locals avoided that region. They said something lived beneath the frozen river, the spirit that fed on those who disturbed the ice. I laughed it off. The first 2 days went fine. Crisp, cold, blue skies, and miles of untouched snow. But on the 3rd night, we heard something. A faint tapping beneath the frozen creek, like knuckles knocking from below. When I leaned closer, I saw the faint outline of a face under the ice. Eyes wide, mouth open in a silent scream. By morning, one of the campers was gone. Only their footprints led to the middle of the creek and stopped. That night, I didn't sleep. The wind had stopped, but the tapping beneath the creek continued, slow, rhythmic, deliberate. When I leaned out of my tent, I saw faint frost patterns forming on the ice, curling like skeletal hands reaching upward. The others were awake too. No one spoke. Then came the whisper, soft, like breath on glass. Cold, help. I froze. The voice was beneath us. The next morning we found Jason, one of the campers, missing. His sleeping bag was empty, unzipped neatly. His boots and coat were gone too, but there were no tracks in the snow leading away. Only that endless white silence. When I checked the creek again, a new face had appeared beneath the ice, pale, distorted, but unmistakably Jason's. Everyone wanted to leave, but the radio had stopped working. The forest around us had gone completely still, like it was waiting. And then, we heard it again, the tapping. But this time, it was closer. By morning, panic had set in. The remaining campers, Sophie, Mark, and Laura, argued whether to hike back. The compass spun aimlessly, and the GPS blinked a red error code. We followed what looked like a faint trail leading east. But the deeper we went, the quieter it became. No birds, no wind, no sound except our crunching boots. Then Laura screamed. She pointed toward a cluster of pine trees ahead, icicles hanging from the branches, shaped like fingers, long and uneven. And among them, a jacket. Jason's jacket. It was frozen stiff, but when I touched it, the fabric was still warm. Sophie began crying, her breath forming a white clouds in the air. Mark turned pale. That's when the ice cracked somewhere behind us. A deep, hollow crack that echoed through the valley. We turned, and on the frozen creek, something was moving beneath the ice, crawling slowly in our direction. We ran until the trees swallowed the creek from view. My lungs burned from the cold, my face numb. We stopped near a ridge where the snow was deeper. Sophie collapsed, sobbing, whispering Jason's name. When I looked back down the hill, the creek was visible again. But something had changed. Dark shadows moved under the surface, gliding fast, darting like predators. Then, from the crack in the ice, a hand emerged, gray, waterlogged, twitching. The fingers clawed weakly at the surface before sinking back under. Mark took a step forward, disbelief written on his face. "It's him," he muttered. "It's Jason." But before I could stop him, the ice near the shore exploded upward. For a split second, I saw Jason's face, blank-eyed and blue, staring right at us from beneath the surface, before he vanished again into the dark water below. As night fell, a fog rolled in, thick, heavy, and unnatural. Our lanterns barely lit more than a few feet ahead. We stumbled into a clearing where an old wooden shack stood, half buried in snow, roof sagging under years of decay. We decided to stay inside until daylight. The walls were covered in carvings, circles, symbols, and what looked like faces. Hundreds of faces, etched in uneven lines, all screaming silently. There was also a journal on the table, soaked in moisture. The writing was faint, but one line stood out clearly. "It watches through the ice. Don't answer the knocking." At midnight, the knocking began again, but this time, it came from the window. I turned the lantern slowly. A face pressed against the frosted glass, Jason's, eyes frozen wide. Lips split open in a silent grin. We barricaded the door, but the whispering outside didn't stop. It circled the cabin, low and cold. Voices blending together, some calling our names. Then one voice spoke clearly, Jason's voice. "Ethan, help me." "Please," I grabbed my flashlight, ignoring Sophie's screams, and stepped outside. The fog had thinned slightly, revealing the creek about 50 meters away. A dim light glowed beneath the ice, pulsing like a heartbeat. When I reached the edge, I saw shapes beneath the surface. Dozens of faces, moving together, eyes open, all mouthing the same silent word. Join. Suddenly, a hand shot up from the ice and grabbed my wrist. It was cold enough to burn. I yanked free and stumbled backward, falling hard into the snow. The whispering turned into laughter, cruel, echoing, endless. By dawn, Mark was gone. His bedroll was empty, the door ajar, footprints leading straight to the creek and stopping. Sophie wouldn't speak. She just sat by the corner, clutching her cross, whispering prayers. I tried the radio again, static, then a faint voice. "Get out of Duskwood before it thaws." When I looked outside, I realized the temperature had risen. The ice was cracking across the entire creek, the surface trembling as if something beneath it was waking up. A foul stench filled the air, rot, decay, and salt. And then the fog parted for just a second. I saw them, figures standing under the ice, upright, staring up at the surface, their faces twisted, frozen in agony. Sophie screamed, "They're looking at us." We packed what little we had left and began hiking toward the ridge. The fog followed, swirling around us like a living thing. Halfway up, Sophie slipped, sliding down the slope toward the creek. I reached for her hand, but before I could grab her, the ice erupted. A dark shape burst out, dragging her under with a splash that froze instantly. The snow around the hole turned red. Then silence. I screamed her name until my throat tore. When I looked closer, her face had already joined the others, pressed beneath the ice, her eyes staring upward, unblinking, mouth still open mid-scream. That's when I realized the truth. The thing beneath the creek wasn't trapping them. It was becoming them. I ran. I don't remember how long. Hours, maybe days. The storm hit and I collapsed near a frozen ridge. When I opened my eyes, it was night again. The aurora shimmered above, and the world was silent. Too silent. Then the ice below me began to glow. Faint, greenish blue. Beneath it, I saw dozens of faces, now including Sophie, Mark, and Jason. All staring upward, their features blending together into one massive, pulsating form. The ice cracked beneath me. I heard whispers in every direction. "Join us, Ethan." I ran again, not stopping until I saw the faint light of a ranger station miles away. They said I was found wandering, half frozen, delirious. But when they went to search the creek, they said it didn't exist. No Duskwood Creek, no cabins, nothing. I left the Yukon that spring. But sometimes I still hear it, the faint tapping at night. A year later, I woke up to find frost creeping across my bedroom window. And when I looked closer, there was a face in it, Jason's. The ice cracked across the glass, and from behind it, something whispered, "It followed you." I moved 5 times since then, but it keeps finding me. Wherever there's frost, wherever the air turns cold, I see their eyes, frozen, waiting. People tell stories about haunted lakes, ghosts, and cursed forests. But I know the truth now. Some places don't want to be forgotten. They remember. And if you ever hear tapping beneath the ice, don't look down. My name is Nathan Hale, and for 3 years, I worked as a marine surveyor for a small research company out of Halifax. In 2018, We were tasked with mapping coastal erosion around a place called Blackwater Cove, a fishing village that wasn't supposed to exist anymore. It had disappeared from Canadian charts decades ago, supposedly wiped out by a storm. But when I arrived, it was still there. Half a dozen houses, a broken dock, and maybe 15 people. They stared at me like I'd stepped into their graveyard. The air smelled of salt and rot, and at night, the sea didn't sound right. The waves were too rhythmic, almost like breathing. One old man, the only one who spoke to me, warned me not to stay after dark. He said, "When the tide sings, cover your ears. If you listen, she'll come for you." That night, as the fog rolled in, I heard it, a low, melodic hum drifting over the black water. And someone sang back. The next morning, I asked the locals about the song I'd heard. They ignored me. One woman muttered something about the sea taking what it wants. When I went to the dock, I saw ropes tied around every boat, knotted thick and nailed to the pier. Even in calm water, no one dared sail. I followed the shoreline and found a pile of fish bones arranged in a spiral, pointing toward the open sea. The air felt heavier there, charged like static before lightning. That night, I stayed in my cabin, listening. At midnight, the humming began again, this time louder, clearer, and closer. It wasn't just one voice. It was many, harmonizing in tones that didn't sound human. I looked out the window toward the cove. The water glowed faintly green, and shapes moved beneath it. Long, fluid, serpentine. Then came the knock. 3 soft taps on my window pane, followed by a whisper that chilled my spine. "Nathan, come see." The next day, I hiked up to the old Blackwater lighthouse, hoping someone there could explain what was happening. Inside, I found the keeper, a frail man named Thomas Reed, his eyes pale and glassy. He looked startled to see me. "You shouldn't be here," he rasped. "They'll smell the land on you." I asked him who they were. He just stared toward the sea and muttered, "When the tide hums, don't look." Don't ever look. As I left, I noticed a strange carving by the door, a circle with jagged lines, like teeth surrounding an eye. That night, I stayed awake, recorder in hand, ready to capture the sound. But when the tide came in, the hum turned into something else, a low, sorrowful wail that made the walls tremble. I couldn't help it. I looked. Out past the dock, rising from the black water, was a figure with long hair floating like seaweed, eyes glimmering pale green under the moon. I recorded everything that night. When I played it back the next morning, the sound wasn't a song anymore. It was whispering, layered over static. And in between the whispers, I heard names. Mine was one of them. When I went down to the beach, the fog was thick and sour-smelling. A trail of wet footprints led from the water straight up to my door. But they weren't barefoot, they were webbed. Thomas found me there, pale and shaking. He said, "Now she knows you." He told me the story, that long ago sailors from Blackwater drowned a girl accused of witchcraft. They tied her to an anchor and dropped her into the cove. Her last curse was that when the sea sang, those who heard it would drown themselves to join her. She's been building her choir ever since, he said. That night, the song returned. Clearer, closer, beautiful in a way that made my chest ache. It called my name again, softly at first, then louder. I covered my ears, humming to block it out. But somehow, I could still hear it, inside my head. The walls began to vibrate. My glass of water rippled. Outside, the tide surged higher than ever, crashing violently against the dock. Then I saw them, figures walking out of the water, their skin gray, hair slick with algae. Their eyes glowed faintly green, mouths moving in perfect harmony with the song. They weren't drowning victims. They were the choir. And at the center of them, floating above the water, was her, the siren. Her face was both beautiful and dead, her voice threading through my skull like silk and steel at once. When I woke the next morning, the storm had calmed, but something was wrong. My ears bled faintly, and when I looked in the mirror, there was salt crusted along my neck, like dried seawater. Thomas found me again. "You looked," he said flatly. "Now she's marked you." He handed me a small wooden charm carved with the same tooth circle symbol from his lighthouse door. "Keep it close," he said. "It might confuse her." But that night, I dreamt of the siren standing at the foot of my bed, dripping seawater onto the floorboards. She smiled and whispered, "You've already joined us. You just don't know it yet." When I woke, the charm was gone, replaced by a small, wet seashell. The next day, the town was silent. Every door open, every window shattered inward. Not a single soul remained. The fog never lifted, thick as smoke. It rolled endlessly across the shore. I walked from house to house, calling out. The only answer was the sound of waves and distant singing. At the docks, I saw them. Villagers walking into the sea, one by one, calm and entranced, their bodies vanishing beneath the surface without a splash. I screamed for them to stop, but my voice was drowned by the melody echoing all around me. And then, for a moment, I swore the siren looked at me again, this time smiling wider, as if proud of what she'd collected. I fled to the lighthouse, desperate. Inside, the beacon light flickered weakly. Thomas was gone, but his chair still rocked as though he'd just left. The sea began to churn violently outside, black waves slamming against the rocks. Then, through the fog, I saw something massive rising, not a creature, but a shape of bones, shipwrecks and bodies all fused together. The siren was singing atop it, her voice shaking the glass. The melody wasn't just a song anymore, it was a command. Every part of me wanted to walk into the sea, to let her end it all. But something deep inside screamed louder, survival. So I smashed the radio beacon and set the lighthouse aflame. The flames spread fast, consuming the wooden tower. The wind roared, sparks flying into the night sky. The siren screamed, a sound that shattered every window in the village below. I stumbled down the rocky path as the structure collapsed behind me, the beam of light dying as it fell into the sea. The fog began to thin for the first time. The water stilled, and the singing stopped. When dawn came, the village was gone. Not destroyed, gone. Only sand and empty shoreline remained. I collapsed on the beach, the surf washing over my legs. Then I heard it, faint, distant. A woman's voice humming one final note. A week later, I was rescued by a fishing trawler. They found me drifting on a piece of debris miles from shore. When I told them I'd come from Blackwater Cove, the captain's face went pale. "There's no such place," he said. "Never was." I didn't argue. But that night, while resting in the cabin, I looked down at the bucket of fish they'd caught. Inside, every fish had human teeth, and from the porthole above my bed, I heard that same low, melodic hum. The tide still sings for me, and one day, I know I'll answer. My name's Caleb Morrison, and I grew up in a quiet logging town called Dawson Trail, deep in Manitoba's endless woods. The population was barely a few hundred, and everyone knew everyone else. But there was one place even the old-timers warned us to stay away from. A dense stretch of pine forest 3 miles east of town that folks called the Screaming Woods. The name wasn't just for show. On certain winter nights, when the wind rolled through the frozen trees, people claimed to hear screams, long, drawn-out wails that didn't sound human. Some said it was the wind whistling through the trunks. Others whispered it was the souls of loggers who died in a fire there decades ago. I never believed any of it, until the night I followed the sound myself. That was the last time I ever set foot in those woods. It started as a stupid dare. My friend Ryan bet me $50 I wouldn't walk into the screaming woods after sunset. It was mid-February, freezing cold, and the kind of night when the moon looked too bright for its own good. I took my flashlight, zipped my jacket, and started walking down the old logging trail. The woods were silent at first, that deep kind of silence where your heartbeat sounds too loud. But as I reached the clearing where the fire supposedly happened, the air changed. It grew heavy, sharp, like the forest was holding its breath. Then, faintly, I heard it. A scream. Not far. Not the wind. It was high-pitched, cracking, desperate. A sound that made my spine crawl. I froze, thinking Ryan was pranking me. But when I turned around, I couldn't see the trail anymore. Just trees. Thick, close, endless. That's when I realized I wasn't alone. I stood perfectly still, trying to listen past my own heartbeat. The scream had faded, replaced by another sound. Footsteps crunching snow, slow and deliberate. I turned the flashlight toward the sound, but it only revealed trees. Then I heard another set of steps, closer this time, circling me. "Ryan?" I called out, my voice breaking. "This isn't funny." No answer. The beam of my flashlight flickered, and for a second, I thought I saw movement. Something pale darting behind a tree. I tried to follow it, but the woods were changing. I swear the path behind me wasn't where it had been. The trees looked older, darker, gnarled. I realized I'd walked too deep. The wind picked up, carrying faint cries. Not one, but many. Like dozens of voices, screaming at once from beneath the ground. Then my flashlight went out. And that's when something grabbed my arm. I yanked my arm away and stumbled backward. My heart hammered as I flicked the flashlight, desperate for light. When it came back on, I saw footprints, but not normal ones. They were long, uneven, like someone crawling instead of walking. The trail of prints led deeper into the woods, toward a dip in the snow where the ground looked disturbed. I should have run, but curiosity got the better of me. I crept closer. The smell hit me first, like rotting leaves mixed with something metallic. Then I saw it, a hole in the snow leading into what looked like a burrow. And inside it was movement. Something pale was shifting beneath the frost, like flesh under ice. Suddenly, a face pressed up from beneath the snow, mouth wide open, screaming without sound. I screamed too and ran. The forest erupted around me with shrieks, echoing from every direction. The woods weren't haunted. They were alive. I ran until my lungs burned, tripping through branches and snowdrifts. My flashlight swung wildly, catching glimpses of faces, translucent, twisted, mouths open in endless screams. Everywhere I looked, the trees seemed to shift. The trail kept disappearing. No matter which direction I turned, I ended up right back where the footprints began. Then, through the noise, I heard one clear voice. "Help me. Please." It sounded human, desperate. I followed it, crashing through the brush until I reached an open clearing. A girl stood there, maybe my age, wearing old torn clothes. Her skin was pale blue, her hair frozen stiff. "Please," she said again. "He won't let us leave." Before I could ask who, she stepped forward, and her eyes rolled white. Behind her, the snow rose like something massive was crawling out of it. The ground split open, snow exploding outward as a shape clawed its way free. It wasn't human, not anymore. It looked like the burned remains of a man, blackened and half melted, with eyes glowing faint orange like dying coals. The girl screamed and vanished into mist. The creature looked at me and rasped, "You shouldn't be here." I stumbled back, but it reached out with a charred hand. The air smelled like smoke and blood. Suddenly, dozens of faint figures appeared around us. Spirits of the dead loggers, still screaming as fire danced on their ghostly skin. They circled the creature, then me. It was like I had stepped into their graveyard. I ran again, this time toward what I hoped was north. But every direction led me deeper into the nightmare. After what felt like hours, I saw a faint light ahead. A cabin. I didn't care whose it was. I just needed shelter. I burst through the door, slamming it shut behind me. Inside, it was dim but warm, lit by a small lantern. There was a table, a cot, and an old journal lying open. The entries were dated 1954. They spoke of a fire that destroyed the Dawson Trail logging camp, and of the men who were burned alive, their screams echoing through the forest for days. The final entry chilled me. We buried them beneath the snow. But they never stopped screaming. Just as I finished reading, the lantern flickered. From outside, I heard knocking, slow, rhythmic, and heavy. Something was standing right outside the door. The knocking grew louder, then stopped. For a moment, there was silence. Then, a whisper right next to my ear. "Let us in." I froze. The voice wasn't outside anymore. It was inside. My flashlight flickered again, and in that flash of light, I saw them. Pale faces pressed against the cabin walls as if emerging from the wood itself. The burned man stood in the corner, whispering through cracked lips, "You heard us." You followed the scream. I tried to run, but the door wouldn't open. My body felt heavy, my breath turning white and thick. They surrounded me, hundreds of them, their mouths moving, but no sound came out. Then everything went dark. I woke up in the snow outside, just before dawn. The forest was silent again. My flashlight was broken, my jacket torn. When I stumbled back into town, everyone was searching for me. They said I'd been gone for 3 days. I told them pieces of what I saw. The sheriff just shook his head. He said I was lucky. Nobody who goes into the screaming woods ever comes back. I tried to forget. I really did. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear them. Faint cries echoing through the trees. And every winter since, someone goes missing near Dawson Trail. It's been 5 years since that night. I moved far away from Dawson Trail, tried to start over. But last week, I got a letter. No return address. Inside was a torn piece of paper from the old journal I read in the cabin. On it, written in shaky handwriting, were just 4 words. The screaming never ends. That night, I woke up to the sound again. Faint at first, then closer. When I looked out the window, snow was falling. And there, at the edge of the forest behind my new house, I saw him, the burned man. He lifted his arm and pointed right at me. Then I heard the scream, not from outside this time, but from inside my own head. My name is Evelyn Carter, and I grew up in a small town called Maple Hollow, hidden deep in Ontario's boreal forest. Population, barely 400. It was the kind of place where winters lasted half the year and everyone went to the same church on Sundays. But Maple Hollow had a secret. At the very edge of town stood a boarded-up mansion, an enormous, rotting Victorian house the locals called the Waiting House. No one had lived there for 50 years. People said it once belonged to a family that vanished overnight, the Wexlers. As a kid, I used to stare at it from the school bus window. Even from a distance, it seemed to breathe. The curtains moving through the windows were sealed shut. My grandmother used to whisper, "That house doesn't stay empty. It just waits." I never believed her. Until the winter my brother disappeared, and the only footprints we found led straight to the waiting house. It was February, bitterly cold. My brother Luke and I had been outside playing near the edge of town, throwing snowballs and chasing each other through the drifts. He was 12, curious, fearless, and always testing limits. We wandered farther than usual, toward the old Wexler property. The trees grew thicker there, the snow untouched. Then I turned around, and Luke was gone. At first, I thought he was hiding. I called out laughing, expecting him to jump out. But the woods stayed silent. I found his footprints leading toward the iron gates of the waiting house and stopping right at the front steps. No prints leaving. The police searched for days. They found nothing. No tracks, no sign of struggle. Just that trail of footprints ending at the door. Everyone said the snowstorm covered the rest. But I knew what I saw. The door had been open. After Luke vanished, Maple Hollow changed. People stopped going near the east end of town. Dogs wouldn't even bark in that direction. But at night, sometimes, I'd hear things. Scratching, faint knocking, like something tapping on glass. Then came the calls. It started one night when the wind was howling outside. The old landline rang, 3 short rings, a pause, then one long one. When I picked up, there was static. And then, faintly, Luke's voice. "Eve," he whispered, "I'm cold." I froze. "Luke, where are you?" "Come to the house," he said. "She's waiting." Before I could ask anything else, the line went dead. I didn't sleep that night. When I told my mom, she broke down crying. Said she'd heard the same voice 2 nights before. The next morning, a letter arrived. No postage, no address. Just my name on the envelope in perfect cursive handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of yellowed paper. It read, "Your brother misses you. The door is open." It was signed, No Wexler. That name hadn't been spoken in decades. I went to the library and looked up the Wexler family. According to the old newspaper archives, Margaret Wexler had been the last person to live in the mansion. The story said she'd gone mad after her husband and daughter froze to death one winter, yet her body was never found. People said she still roamed the halls, waiting for her family to return. That night, I packed a flashlight, grabbed my coat, and walked toward the waiting house. If Luke was there, I was bringing him home. The iron gates creaked open on their own. Snow fell softly as I stepped onto the porch. The door wasn't locked. Inside, the air was stale, thick with dust and cold like a tomb. My flashlight revealed faded wallpaper, shattered mirrors, and portraits of people whose eyes seemed to follow me. Somewhere upstairs, a music box was playing. I followed the sound, every step of the staircase moaning under my boots. When I reached the second floor, the music stopped, replaced by whispering. Then I saw the footprints, small, familiar, Luke's. They led down the hall, into a bedroom with the door half open. "Luke," I called softly. The door swung wide. The room was empty. But there, on the bed, was his red winter hat. And beside it, a handprint in the dust. Not his. It was too large. As I stood frozen, a sudden gust of wind slammed the door shut behind me. The lights flickered, though there hadn't been power in that house for 50 years. Then I noticed the mirror across the room. It was fogged, but I could see a shape standing behind me. I spun around. Nothing. When I looked back, she was there. An old woman in a tattered black dress, face pale and hollow, eyes sunken and black. She smiled through the glass. "Welcome home, Evelyn," she whispered. I stumbled backward, knocking over a chair. My flashlight flickered violently, and for a split second, her reflection moved closer. Though I hadn't. "Where's my brother?" I screamed. The mirror cracked. Her voice echoed through the house. "He's part of the family now." I ran out of the bedroom and down the stairs, the floor groaning beneath my feet. The whispers followed me. Dozens of them, overlapping, calling my name. Then I saw it. A faint light leaking from beneath a door at the end of the hall. The basement. Something in me knew that's where Luke was. The door handle was ice cold. I pulled it open and descended the narrow staircase, the air growing colder with each step. At the bottom, candles flickered in a perfect circle, surrounding a single wooden chair. And sitting in that chair was Luke. His eyes were open but blank, his skin pale like paper. He didn't move when I called his name. Behind him stood the woman from the mirror. "Now we're all home," she said. I rushed forward, shaking Luke's shoulders. "Wake up, please." He blinked slowly, his lips trembling. "She won't let me leave." The woman smiled, a cold, deathless grin. "He came willingly," she said. "He wanted warmth." I gave him that. "But one must always stay." Her voice was calm, almost gentle. "You can take his place, Evelyn. The house likes you." My heart raced. "Take me then. Just let him go." She stepped closer, her form flickering like candlelight. "You would stay?" "Yes," I shouted. She smiled wider, too wide. "So be it." The candles flared, blindingly bright. When I opened my eyes again, Luke was gone, and I was sitting in the chair. Time doesn't move in the waiting house. The candles never burn out. The snow outside never stops falling. I've seen the others, the lost souls who came before. They wander the halls, whispering names of loved ones they'll never see again. Sometimes I hear Luke outside the window, calling to me. "Come home, Eve." But I can't. The house won't let me leave. It feeds on the missing, the ones no one remembers. And when the next lost traveler stumbles in from the cold, I'll see her too. The woman in black, smiling, waiting. They say Maple Hollow is a ghost town now. The people left after too many children vanished. The woods reclaimed the streets, and the snow buried what was left. But the waiting house still stands. Its windows glow faintly on winter nights. And if you stand close enough, you can hear a woman's voice calling softly from inside. Come home. Last month, hikers found an old landline phone in the snow near the house. It rang once. A woman's voice answered. She said her name was Evelyn Carter. And then she asked, "Have you seen my brother?" Hello again, Dark Fears family. If you've made it this far, take a deep breath, because what you've just heard were 10 of the most chilling, true small-town nightmares buried deep within the frozen heart of Canada. Places where time stands still, where every scream echoes longer in the cold, and where even the dead seem too afraid to rest. From cursed lakes and haunted hospitals, to the woods that whisper your name. Each story reminds us of something terrifyingly real. That in small towns, evil doesn't hide. It waits. And sometimes, it waits for you. So if you ever find yourself driving through a lonely Canadian road on a snowy night, and you see a flickering porch light from an old house that shouldn't be there, keep driving. Because some doors, once opened, never close again. Thank you for watching, and for facing the darkness with us tonight. If you enjoyed these stories, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell, so you never miss another night of true terror. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and never stop fearing the dark. This was Dark Fears